Very good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, I'm Mark Smith. I'm from the Social Media Research Foundation. I'm a sociologist, and the talk today will be about ways of using a method known as network theory to get consumer insights, behavioral insights, attitude insights from streams of social media. And the primary method for us is that we are interested in networks. We're interested in what you could call collections of connections, the webs of relationships that form when groups of people come together and they have choices. They could reply or mention or follow or friend, do all the things that we get to do on the internet when we're clicking and tapping. We're almost always generating relationships with other people. So these are some of the other people who have become part of the Social Media Research Foundation. We're a California not-for-profit, and we produce a tool known as NodeXL, the Network Overview, Discovery, and Exploration add-in for Excel. If you're a Excel user, you're probably already pretty comfortable with the tool that we provide. So the first question I'd like to address is, why should we even bother to draw pictures of a hashtag? And that is our goal. We recognize that social media is a remarkably powerful force, but it's one that we have relatively little insight and data about. For example, if I ask the question, how many kinds of hashtags are there? And in what way does hashtag 1 compare to hashtag 2? Most of the time we end up with volume answers. How many people, how many tweets? What we want to do is argue that it's going to take more than just the volume of data, more than just giving you a bunch of big data answers, numeric values, because getting insight into numeric values is often very difficult. Here, for example, are 4 distributions of data, 4 XY coordinate pairs. Does anybody see the error? Or perhaps the outliers? And isn't it clear the way in which distribution 2 and 3 are sort of the same but different from 1 and 4? Maybe that's not happening for you, so we're supposed to turn to summary statistics. We have a problem. All the summary statistics are identical for the 4 distributions, but we can solve this problem. In 300 milliseconds, every one of us will come to some level of insight if we present the data in a slightly different way. And here we go, 300 milliseconds from now, we're all going to go, oh. So drawing data really does matter. And so unless you are one of those supernumerate quantified people, you may not have had this insight of awareness into the distributions of this data without drawing a picture of it. So I should note that in the social world, crowds really matter. And if a crowd of thousands of people gather in front of your city hall or parliament building, it becomes news, and somebody almost invariably takes a photograph of it, and the photograph is itself a newsworthy item. The challenge we are facing is that crowds are less likely to form in the physical world and more likely to form in the virtual world. And when they do, the interfaces to those crowds lose the crowdness. It would be as if we asked all those people in that picture to line up single file. We would then not know things about the size and the shape and the divisions of the crowd. And that's what happens when we look at things like Twitter and Facebook. We just see a list of messages, and we lose the insight into things like, are there divisions? Who are the leaders? And what characterizes group 1 versus group 2? And of course, we can address all of that in 300 milliseconds. Here is a picture of that group of people. And each of those little dots, that's a person in Twitter. And they're talking about the former president of the United States. And apparently it is not just one crowd. It was at least 2 or 5 or 6 different subgroups. And they have different levels of internal connection and intergroup connection. The group 2 and the group 1, they're not that much, well, they're not that friendly with one another. And if we look at the words being used by the people in group 1 versus group 2, what we're going to see, they're two different groups of people and they have very different attitudes towards the topic in question. So what we want to do is making these kinds of visualizations so much easier. And in many cases, we need better tools. Not all of the tools to make these visualizations like this can actually do a better job of spreading out the graph, revealing its subclusters, highlighting its structure. But we feel that with better research and better innovation, that is possible. And the result then is a way of looking at social media as a structure, as a shape, as something that has maybe a center and a periphery. It might have different groups or subdivisions. And these could be people talking about your brand, your product, your issue, your candidate, your event. And so network theory has been around for a while. This is one of the first published mentions of it in the press from 1933. And it basically talks about the ways in which human beings form relationships, some of which are strong, but most of which are relatively weak. And it is this web of strong and weak connections that sometimes combine that allow us to recognize, well, this is the title of the most cited paper in all of sociology, The Strength of Weak Ties, by Mark Granovetter, in which he notes that most people get a job via connections with people that they only know a little bit, that it's not your family or your closest friends who help you get a job, but often people who don't know you all that well. And that's because they know people that you don't know that well. So there is some humorous content out there on the web. If you go to bonkersworld.net, there's this great cartoon about how network theory can illustrate visually something about the culture of different large organizations. And I did spend 10 years at Microsoft, and I'd have to say that it's pretty accurate. So what we want to do is make it so that you can actually make these kinds of maps to capture this sense of flocking behavior, generating different kinds of structures to see that people flock to, and every time they click and tap and swipe, they're forming connections with one another. And most of the time, we don't really get to see the shape of that. Most of the tools out there about social media tell you that you had 10 of something, not that they were arranged in a particular shape. And that can be a problem because we actually want to know how some group of people, maybe marketing got 10,000 people to show up, but what shape did they form? It's not enough to know that you had the same number of Lego bricks in the box. It's also very important to know what shape could they be formed into. And so in social media, we can now try to provide people with a tool. Maybe it's kind of like a camera. Maybe we could upgrade it to the digital camera on your phone. And the idea is that it's going to take a picture of a group, but not a physical group. It's going to take a picture of a virtual group. And these virtual groups have shapes. And the shapes tell us something about who is important. And it tells us something about the nature of the topic being discussed. So the goal is to making these maps about as easy as making a pie chart. And indeed, you can go into Excel, go into our menu, click on a few things and say, tell me about the group of people talking about topic X. And the result would be a picture and a data set, a spreadsheet, a series of workbooks, rather worksheets in a workbook that tell the story of this group of people, this collection of connections. That story often has information about what they are talking about, who the people are who are the leaders of these conversations. We're looking at the time series of the discussion. When did it spike? We're also looking at the language being used. And I'll note that we encourage our users to replace our language lists, which are in American English, And you could replace them with all sorts of languages, or for that matter, subject matter expert vocabularies. If you were going to do a study of automotive, you might want to create 3 lists of words that are about economy, performance, and safety, rather than positive, negative, and angry, violent. So the tool's goal is to shed light on groups of people talking about a topic. Maybe we could point it at ourselves. What does it look like if we were to map #NewMR? And the answer is, it gives us a picture of how this discussion has been happening over time. So let's go back for a second. What we see are several clusters, each of which has a particular shape. It's kind of a wheel, a circle. It's a hub with a series of spokes around it. This is the shape of audience. It's the pattern that is created when one or a few people speak and other people retweet or reply to them. But when they do so, they don't talk to each other. So they form an audience, not a community. It is worth noting that there is this group over here, group 8, and that's the indication of how much the #NewMR is a brand, which is to say, what is the fraction of the population that mentions the hashtag, but is not named by anybody else and never names anybody else, which is to say, how large is your periphery? And it will turn out that the more brand-like you are, the larger that segment of the population grows. And so we might want to know about its temporal dimension. When are the spikes? When are the troughs? It does strike me that we are a group of professionals who really enjoy our weekends. So we're not going to be tweeting about NewMR on Saturday and Sunday, not nearly as much as it looks like Wednesday is a big day for NewMR. So the kind of data that we want to provide you are the things that you might need to report to other people about what you've just seen, how many people, what period of time, how many connections among them. But then, of course, you come to the question, well, you know, what else can I know? We can tell you who the key people are. And I'll note that these are the people who are at the center of the network, not the people who simply have a lot of tweets or a lot of followers. So these are people we are identifying as important because of where in the graph they are located, not some other attribute like their clout score. So we can do this for all sorts of topics, and we'll do it for the content as well. We'll highlight the top URLs and domains, what the related hashtags are. Of course, that might motivate you to go off and make some more maps. When you make these maps, you get insights that can be acted upon. You can decide to engage certain people. And we have this feature here, the smart tweet button, that actually will prompt you with some hashtags and words to mention to the mayor of a topic. This is a way of getting some insight into NewMR. We could also do it again for SOMR. That's a related topic of large interest and overlap with NewMR. And I'll just briefly touch on this one so that we can see it has a slightly different shape. It has different temporal patterns. It had one big spike rather than a series of spikes. And the series of spikes, by the way, for NewMR, I think that represents the tweet chat days. So, and of course, we're also going to see that it has a different set of top influencers. So, with that, I'm going to go past the SMR data and come to our conclusion. I think time is probably running out, but I hope that you will see that network analysis is a way of bringing social media into focus and revealing essentially the shape of that naturally occurring, ongoing global focus group. And this is a way of deriving some insight into the otherwise blooming, buzzing confusion that is a stream of 100,000 tweets or several tens of thousands of posts in a Facebook page. This is a way of gaining some insight into it. If you go to Pinterest and look for NodeXL, you'll find a bunch of peer-reviewed publications that are now using NodeXL. You can also visit us at scholar.google and search for NodeXL and find many of the papers that are published as well. You can find us on the web at smrfoundation.org. That's the Social Media Research Foundation. And you can find me, despite being named Smith, remarkably Googleable. If you'd like, send me an email, Mark with a C, at SMR Foundation, and we'll make you a map. So suggest a hashtag, a word, a username that you would like to see mapped, and we'd be happy to do that. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, Ray, for the opportunity to share our work, and I'd be happy to take any questions.